Guys, welcome back to my art channel. So a few days ago I posted a poll on YouTube asking what I should paint for today's video, and the winner was an animal watercolour painting in my sketchbook. Thank you to everyone that voted, and I hope you all enjoy the video. I'm painting in my Hanhemuhle watercolour sketchbook again today, which you might have seen me start a few weeks ago. I'm also using my Schmincke watercolour in pans, but all the items I use will be listed in the description box. So now I'm ready to start sketching my animal, and today I'm painting this little blue tit. I'm using a reference photo from Pixabay which I've printed off on my computer. I've been wanting to try adding salt to my watercolour paintings to add in some fun effects and interesting texture, and had the idea to try it out today on the bird's fluffy chest feathers. If it works and I like it, I can then use it again on a bigger painting. I'm going to start by sketching out our blue tit, and I'll show you quickly how I do this using a method somewhere between the grid method and sketching freehand. You can skip to the painting bit if you want to, but when you're drawing at a horizontal table like I am, your proportions can get a bit skewed, so I find this helps. You need to start with a picture that's the same size as you want to sketch and don't mind drawing on. All I do is draw lines to mark out the top of the bird's head and the bottom of the bird's body. I then measure the distance in between the two and transfer these measurements onto my sketchbook and mark them with a line. You can use dots instead of lines if you're worried about having to erase them later on, but I use lines as you can then use the negative space to further help draw an accurate sketch. I mark out where the beak is in the same way, as well as the width of the body. This also helps to make sure your whole sketch will fit neatly on your page. And you can make as many or as few measurements as you need. Once the measurements have been made, I start to mark in my outline and the main features of the drawing. Notice how I also use the negative space or area around the bird as well to help make sure everything is in the right place. I start to add in some of the details like the bird's markings as well as the feet and branch. With this done, I can erase the guidelines and lighten up the sketch with a kneaded eraser or blue tack, and I'm ready for painting. I'm swatching out the colours I might use on the left hand side of the page and use the reference picture again to help me. I'm also going to use this page to see how salt works on the paper. Now, the first colour I thought of when I saw the reference photo was ultramarine blue. This is just the right colour for the blue feathers on the blue tit's head. For the darker blue shadow areas, I pick up some indigo and test it out on top of the still wet ultramarine blue. This will work really nicely for the beak as well. For the bird's yellow chest feathers, I thought I'd use more of a lemon yellow, and I'm going to use this as a base to build on. The darker, more greeny chest feathers can be depicted by simply adding the ultramarine blue on top of the wet lemon yellow. I might also add in a bit of yellow ochre as well, just on the bottom part of the blue tit's chest. Lastly, I test out some sepia because I think this will work well for the shadow areas as well as the branch. Now it's time to add a pinch or two of salt, and for this painting I'm using regular table salt. I try it out first on my swatch here, which has started to dry, but where it's wetter at the bottom you can immediately start to see the salt do its magic. I've not really experimented much with using salt before with my watercolours, but from what I've learnt, getting a good result is all about timing. Add salt to very wet paper and nothing will happen. Add salt to dry paper and nothing will happen either, so it needs to be just right. How well the salt performs may also depend on the paper you're using as well as the paints. Different brands of paints as well as different pigments within those brands might react differently too, so it's always worth testing out your watercolour supplies to find out what works and what doesn't. After the test swatches have dried, I brush off the salt. The yellow ochre swatch, which I applied salt to when it was almost dry, had little or no effect, unsurprisingly, whilst the ultramarine swatch, which I deliberately added a lot of water to, worked a treat, so I need to bear that in mind for my blue tit painting. I start off by applying some clean water first before dropping in some of the ultramarine blue to the bird's head. I pull out some of the paint onto the dry paper too to give a nice feathery effect. Now I'm wetting the area under the blue to soften the edges and add a very dilute indigo to break up the white area and help it blend in with the rest of the head. Next I'm adding in some indigo to the darker band around the bird's eye area, leaving the eye itself free of water and paint as I want to paint that later. I'm using ultramarine and some indigo colour to paint in the darker feathers under the beak, working wet into wet again, and I carry on in the same way under the bird's neck. This paper seems to dry really quickly, so after I'd finished with the blue mix under the neck, I'd go back and work on his eye. Now it's time for the body, and this is the area I want to add salt to. I'm pre-wetting the whole chest area with clean water and start to drop in ultramarine blue. Underneath the body, I pull some of the paint out in small strokes onto the dry paper to give that feathery look. Working wet into wet, I now drop in ultramarine blue and lemon yellow and let them mix together on the paper to create the yellow-green colour I see in the reference photo. I need to work quickly and add the salt whilst the paper is still quite wet, so I sprinkle it on over the chest area. Now I can relax a bit and wait for the salt to do its thing as the paper dries. I soften up the edges on the right hand side of the bird's body using a damp brush and begin on the branch. For this I'm using the wet on wet method again, pre-wetting the whole branch with clean water before dropping in some dark sepia. And I really like the way the sepia paint bleeds out and spreads into the water. It's so easy and gives a really nice effect for that branch. I'm applying more sepia to the top edge of that branch now whilst the paper is still wet. Now that layer needs to dry before I can add any more paint, so I'm moving on to paint the bird's tail feathers. Again I'm pre-wetting the paper before adding ultramarine and dropping in some indigo on top so they can mix together on the wet paper. Now the branch is dry, I can start to paint in the bird's feet and legs. I use a mixture of ultramarine blue and indigo. I use the same mix to fill in the beak. Now with the yellow chest feathers dry, I can brush off the salt. It has worked a bit, but because the lemon yellow is quite light, it hasn't shown up as much as I wanted it to, and I'm going to add another paint and salt layer to try and make it more visible. First though, I need to add in a few more details to the rest of the blue tit. I re-wet the whole head area and drop in indigo and a touch of violet to add more depth, and I do the same for the other blue areas as well. Now I'm adding a darker layer of paint to the chest area so I can try the salt technique again. I mix ultramarine and lemon yellow and paint it over the blue tit's chest. This time though, rather than tackling the whole chest area at once and being in a race against time before my paper dries, I'm doing it in 2 stages. So I paint the left side of the chest first and add salt, and then do the same for the right side. And whilst this is drying, I add another layer to deepen up the branch. I wet the whole branch first with clean water and paint a layer of indigo over the top, working from the outside edges inwards to create a nice smooth gradient. Now with it all dry, I can remove the salt again, and I'm much happier with the result this time. Now though, I think I need to darken up the feathers on the underside of his body. For this, I mix up some indigo and lemon yellow. I pre-wet the area with clean water and drop in some of this colour. I also use some short strokes with my brush, dragging the wet paint onto the dry areas to give that feathery look. I don't want to cover up all the nice effect I got with the salt though. Now I add another layer of indigo to the tail feathers, and I'll be doing the same for the blue feathers on the bird's head and neck. I also add some more detail to the eye and beak. And I'm darkening up the top of the head again and add a few last touches to the chest. In my rush to get the salt on the wet paper, I'd completely forgotten to add any of the yellow ochre colour I'd planned at the start, but I'm quite pleased with how it turned out anyway. With the body complete, I have to add a bit of detail to the bird's feet. For this, I'm using a mixture of paint left over on my palette as well as neutral tint. I've decided to add another wash to the branch too, using the neutral tint as it's a super dark area in the reference photo. Now I'm adding in a darker paint mix on the area of branch underneath the blue tit's body for his shadow, and I'm really quite pleased and surprised with how well the branch turned out. Now to add in some fine white feathers, and for this I use this white gouache. You may not be able to see it very well on the video, but I add in a few feather details around the already white areas to make them nice and fine, as well as a few white highlights to the feet. I finish up by redefining the blue tit's eye using a black Copic multiliner. And this is how he turned out. I had a lot of fun painting this blue tit, and I hope you enjoyed watching him come to life in the video. I really loved the salt effect on his feathers, and I've already got ideas of how I can use this technique in other paintings. If you like the video, please give it a big thumbs up and comment below, and if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. Hit the notification bell too so you don't miss out on any future videos. Let me know as well if you have any other sketchbook animal suggestions, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great weekend. Bye.